Hey everyone. So what are we going to do today? Uh, the comments have been put out there that there's CloudStack, and this is an Apache version of virtualization. It gives you a GUI. You can use different hypervisors. It's free. It's kind of like OpenStack. All the same premises apply. It does go on Ubuntu rather well. We're going to use 14.04. So I thought it'd be a good break to get away from OpenStack for a little bit and check out CloudStack, just see what it's all about. So we're going to run through an install on a single machine. This is going to be a different machine. I'm using a desktop. It has 4 gig of memory. It's got a slow 2 terabyte hard drive in it, and it's got an AMD processor that does have virtual threading. You will have to have virtual threading if you want to install KVM on a machine. So remember that and make sure it's on in your BIOS. So this, if you just Google CloudStack 14.04, this guy put together a run through of how you get it done on one machine, and it's pretty good. He does some stuff that I'm not going to do because I don't think it's necessary. There's some security issues here as usual with the test. We're going to allow root login. Just a couple different things. We're going to go through the whole thing, and from install all the way to spinning up a VM, and then if we're successful, maybe we can talk about adding different compute nodes, adding some more CPUs, things like that. So we're going to get started here. We're going to loosely use this. I'll put it all on the website for everyone. We are going to start with a brand new install of 14.04, and nothing has been done yet, so let's get going. The box, when we installed it, DHCP, it came up as IP212, so let's get logged in. The name of our CloudStack server is Stack, you'll notice. So as always, we start with an update. And an upgrade. Everything's good. We'll check that a couple of times during the install. So let's just get started with his tutorial. Again, this is pretty good. The first thing he does, so he's going to give you a lot of commands they're just going to automatically fill in the files. I'm going to step through them because I think it's important to understand what we're editing and to do these edits manually. The first thing he does is he creates a host name with the actual IP of the box and a domain name in the Etsy host file. We can do that. I'm not sure. I mean, the database is going to use that, but I don't know that it's actually necessary, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. So basically what he's telling you to do is to change this to the IP of the ETH1 interface that you want to use. So when it does a lookup, it's going to come back to this IP. Now we're currently still on the DHCP IP that it came up with by default, but we're going to switch to use 151, and I'll show you that and tell you why here in just a second. He also uses an arbitrary DNS value. I don't know if it's arbitrary for him, but it's going to be for us. So I'm just going to use my common DNS value in here. You can see it right here. Again, I don't know that this actually makes any difference, but this is pretty common for a host file. And again with the server name, Stack. So we're going to go with that. So save that. Now the next one, he's going to install NTP. You'll notice all these commands, there's no sudo on them. It's because he's using the root account. And to use the root account, he actually uses the root account to log it in and use NFS and the GUIs and things like that. He allows this machine to be logged in via root. That's not a good safety practice. Ubuntu does that on purpose, so you can't do that. But for testing, it's fine. If you're okay with it, that's fine. There are other ways to get around it. Using root is just the easiest, quickest way to get us stood up so you can start testing this stuff. So I don't condone root, but we can do it for this test. So to set the root account, do sudo passwd root, and it's going to ask you for a password. So set your root password, and then you're allowed to use root. So then you can just do an SU and enter your password, and now you have a root. So that's how you get into that. Install NTP service. You need NTP service for CloudStack to work. And that's time protocol, network time protocol. Okay, we've already set up the root account. This is to allow SSH logins via root. So we're going to edit this etc SSH file. And come down to authentication, and it's going to say, by default 1404 is going to say without password. Just change this to yes to allow root logins. So exit, save it. Yep, good. Now you can restart SSH. Okay, next, networking. And as with every cloud install, networking is always the issue, right? So in CloudStack, they want you to use bridge utilities. And if you don't install bridge utilities first, your server's not going to come back up. So install the bridge utilities, and then we'll get started on the interfaces file. So edit your interfaces file. Okay, this is generic, as you've seen in the past. He shows you how to set up these two bridges, a private network and a public network bridge, and he sets ETH0 to manual, you'll notice. So we're going to copy this, and I'll show you what we're doing. If we set ETH1 to manual, that is going to allow something else in the config file to set up ETH1 as its own, which we're going to call bridge. So we're creating an interface, a network basically, called Cloud Bridge 0 and Cloud Bridge 1. We're only going to use Cloud Bridge 0 because it's all on the same machine. The private network would be set up for other nodes, like if we add other compute nodes. So we'll do that in the future if we want to get really involved with this CloudStack. We'll see how we like it first. So set your address to 150 or 1 or whatever your ETH1, whatever you want your ETH1, ETH0, sorry, interface to be set at. Set it down here in the bridge portion. Set all your network settings in the bridge portion. And as long as you have bridge util installed, it'll work. You don't need DNS domain. I'm just going to take that out. We won't need that for our purposes. We're not going to do DNS lookups. And we don't have a real domain anyway. We're using dynamic. So, and the private network, no change down here. It's set to none. It's set to manual. So we're not even going to be using it yet. It will be, you can see it in the ifconfig output, which we'll look at, but we're not using it yet. So this is going to get us ETH1 over to the 151 address. So let's save that, and we will reboot. Okay, we've rebooted. We're coming back up on the 151 address. Let's log in. And let's take a look at ifconfig after the network changes that we made. And you'll see the bridge is logged in and it's up at 151. ETH1's going to be up as well. It has no settings, but it's being used inside this bridge. This bridge is up as well, but it has no, it's got INET 6, but that doesn't really matter. It has no INET address that's going to be usable at this time. You can see the traffic's coming through the bridge. So there's the network setup. Make sure you have that bridge util set up. Okay. Now we're going to add the CloudStack source file, or source destination, archive, if you will, to the right config files. Again, we're going to use root. So we're creating our own custom source list, if you'd like. So it's going to be an empty file. And we're going to add the repository. So we're using Trusty 1404 and 4.4 version of CloudStack. There is the current version of CloudStack is 4.9.2. but I've had luck with 4.4. They're somewhat similar, and they're upgradable via apt-get. So we're going to install 4.4 just for the sake of using this tutorial. You're not going to have a ton of difference in between 4.4 and 4.9, but we'll upgrade after the fact and see what it looks like. Okay, so we'll install with 4.4, save this, and then we will do a web-get for the keys, and these are the apt keys for the CloudStack repository. So we'll save those on the machine, and everything was good. We've got them, and now we'll do an update, and you'll see the cloud repositories are now available in our archives. Okay. Now we are ready to do the install for CloudStack management. So let's copy that and we'll let it install. Okay, CloudStack is installed. Now we're going to install MySQL. First thing it's probably do, we'll ask you to set a password. There it is. Set it to whatever you would like. Just remember it. Okay. MySQL's in. Now we're going to add our specific CloudStack config file for MySQL. There's one flaw with this that in his tutorial. Let's edit that. You have to have all this stuff, yes, but you also have to have a service ID, and you'll want to put it in right about there. And actually I have the syntax bookmarked. Let's see, there it is. This guy right here, you have to set a service ID, so we'll add that in. Again, this will be on the site. So that's what the MySQL config file looks like. We'll save that. And he had some problems with mismatches with MySQL. I have not had that issue, so we're going to skip that part, and we're going to restart MySQL. Should come back just fine. Yes, we're good. Skip that. Now we're going to do this CloudStack setup portion. Let's pop open Notepad because we're going to have to edit some things. I've probably already got all this done somewhere, but it doesn't matter. Okay, we're going to grab a new one. So copy this, and we're just going to edit it by hand. Some of this you don't actually need, but I'm going to do it just for good measure. Get this organized a little bit here. Okay. Cloud. So set up your your cloud user at localhost, whatever the password you would like to use. I use a very simple default password for pretty much everything. This is this MySQL password that we just set up when we did the SQL install. Mine is a super secret password. This is encryption. It's file based. I'm not sure. These are keys, database keys of some type. You don't actually have to configure these by default. You don't have to add any from this over if you don't want to. But I'm going to leave it that way, and we'll just remember what we set them as. Don't think it's an issue, so enter that command. And this takes just a minute. It's setting up the database for CloudStack. Okay, make sure this CloudStack successfully initialized database, make sure that looks good. Note as well, detected local IP. It got that from the host file, and that's why we changed that host file, is so that it would have the correct IP of the box. So just note that. Okay, next we'll prepare storage. I'm going to take a quick break and get Movie Maker crunching our video files so we can get it out to YouTube. I'll be right back. Okay, back to the configuration. Now, the NFS setup is a little tricky on this, and it's not necessarily tricky, it's just somewhat hard to understand, I think. I think it's because we're mounting NFS shares on the same server. It would be easier to understand if this was like a NAS device, I think. But it's so we're serving and using NFS shares on the same box. So let's make a couple of directories out in the export folder, and then we're going to install the NFS kernel server. This should also include it should be the client and the server. You'll see it installs NFS common. This is probably just for good measure. This should get you everything you need. Okay, it didn't start anything because there's no exports. So we're going to create the exports file. So let's do that. Okay, and this is where you put any folders you would like to share from this server. We're going to share the exports folder with everyone. This is where you would put like a list of IPs of servers and whether they were read-write or read-only, but we're going to share and open it up to everybody. Everybody could mount this if they wanted to. So put that in there. And then you run export file system all -a, and that makes the exports available to everyone. That rereads the file. If so, more than you need to know, but if you went in and did made an edit to that line, you would not be able to just export it again because it's not a new line. You would have to do a -r. That would reread the whole file and make the updates for you. Just a little more information. Again, I think common is good to go, but we'll go ahead and run the command. It doesn't hurt anything. Yes, it's already installed. He makes some configuration options, or he makes some changes in the configuration for NFS common. We don't need to do that. We're not going to run statd. We're not isolating this to specific ports. We're not using a firewall or things like that. Don't have to do that. Configure lockd. Again, this is isolating it to certain ports. We can come back and look at it if something goes wrong, but you don't have to do that either. We can restart only because we made a change to that export file. So go ahead and restart it. That won't hurt anything. It exported this time instead of saying not started. So it started it because there was an exports option. And if you do show mount E for localhost, it should show you that export asterisk. Okay? Just as a test, so he's going to mount these locally. That's where we get confusing. Just as a test, if you have another server that's available, like we have our trusty MAS box that we always use, you can do, I don't even think you need sudo, but if you do show mount -e to the IP of the other server, the one we just exported, it's going to come up and give you a list of available exports. So I could mount this on this other server at /anything and /export if I wanted to. That's a good way to check if you have another server available, if everything's open, ready to go, and NFS is working correctly on the stack box. Again, just a tip. Don't have to do it. You should be fine. Okay. So he adds these. So FS tab, as you all know, we're gonna I'll step back. We're going to make a couple of directories here for temporary mount purposes only. So we're going to make them in the MNT directory, primary and secondary. So go ahead and do that. And then we're going to edit the FS tab. So FS tab is where you would put anything that you wanted remounted at boot time. Or if you want to just use the mount command, it will pull out of FS tab, and I'll show you that here in just a second. So he adds these two lines, and we're going to do it. These are variables that he used, so you can use the one giant command. Don't worry about that. So we're just going to add at the beginning the IP of this server, since the client and the server exist on the same box, right? So we're mounting ourselves, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So this makes you able to run a command that says mount this directory, and it's going to know that it wants you to mount the export folder, primary and secondary, at this location. It's not going to mount them automatically at boot, because you don't want that. You want CloudStack to mount them itself. We're only going to do this for to import templates for that purpose, and no auto is the key to this. It's not going to automatically mount them, but it does give it the parameters, like we're using NFS version 3 with the timeouts and the size, read-write times, what type they are. It gives you all that information, but it's not going to mount them at boot. We're only using these for a utilitarian purpose. So exit, save that guy, and see right now he's going to issue the mount command. That's going to pull all the attributes out of the FS tab and mount these up. So if you do df-k, you'll see they're both mounted as MNT. And we'll look at this again after the install. This is only to test that the NFS server is working and gives us the ability to load some templates onto the secondary, where you should have all your templates in the secondary storage location. This gives us the option to put some templates over there. So now we get into libvirt. So the libvirt configuration is really where you need this is what gives you the utilities to use the virtual attributes, I guess, of CloudStack. So we're going to install the CloudStack agent. libvirt's kind of like a virtual toolkit. Okay, so the cloud agent has been installed. So then the tutorial goes on to say we're going to change some of these parameters in libvirt. Again, I think he's kind of focused towards maybe a constrained environment where certain ports are closed, things like that. We don't have that issues here. This is just a generic install. We can revisit these if we have issues, but I don't think we need to. Same with this option, adding that L to libvirt ops. We don't need to do that. Now this one, Q emulator, this is what actually does the emulation for KVM, and it uses CloudStack uses VNC as a virtual console, so you can get into your instances if you need to. This is there's some value in this. You want to be able to listen for VNC on any IP address. So we'll go ahead and make that change. So just to uncomment this VNC. Listen, default it's only localhost, but you'll want to be able to access it from anywhere if you need to. Okay, AppArmor is one that I'm not so sure about. We'll deal with it later if we have to. We might have to disable that, but I don't want to do any more than we absolutely positively have to. So we're going to restart libvirt. Okay. He sets up firewall ports. Ubuntu firewall is it is installed, but it's disabled by default. So if you're using default settings, you won't have to use these ports. If you need them, go for it. We don't need them in this install. So this is just checking to make sure RPC and everything with the NFS shares are working correctly. And I used the wrong IP. Be careful when copying and pasting. Okay, that finally timed out. Let's try it again with the right IP. That's what it should look like. All the NFS versions are ready to go. And let's just do a show mount for this address. Again, this is just making sure that NFS is ready to go and mountable and exported and all that good stuff. It is. Now he mounts both of them up here. You don't really need to do that. You only need secondary to go grab that template, but we're going to follow along. So we'll mount. Oh, they're already mounted because we haven't rebooted. So df-k, make sure they're mounted. They are mounted already still because we didn't reboot because of libvirt. Now we're going to grab the template. So just copy this whole thing, and we're going to grab the system template that KVM is going to use to build the system VMs, and we'll go over what that's doing here a little bit more when the GUI comes up. Okay, so it downloaded the template that it's going to need to build the system. Notice that it put it in that mount secondary. It's on our NFS shares so that CloudStack can use it. Just take a look. See, it's called it template 1. There's a template in there. Good to go. That's all you need to do. Now, so everything should be good to go, and we're ready to start utilizing the GUI. First thing I would recommend is unmount these temporary mounts. And you can just use a Umount and Umount. Okay, that we temporarily mounted these so that we could test them, one, and use them to load those templates. What I would do right now is this is a great time to reboot and make sure all your changes that we made to config files or anything like that don't harm the system. Go ahead and reboot. Okay, we're back in. Let's go back into root. Okay, df-k, see what those mounts are doing. They're not there. That's good. Okay, now let's move on to the GUI portion. It's port 8080/client is what we need to worry about. And there it is. And this is super common. I've had this happen every time that I've installed. So, and he comments on it in the tutorial. And if you scroll down here, where is it? It says 404. Here we go. Yeah. If you get a 404, try this stuff. Just stop everything. Make sure these 4 commands: stop Tomcat, stop management. This happens every time I reboot. Stop the agent and check and see what kind of Java hooks are running. It shouldn't be anything. That's just the grep command we just ran. And then we'll just start and status the agent and the management again. Okay, they're both running, agent and the management stack. Now, this is still set in here 404 clocked out. Hit refresh, and you'll notice it's going to go waiting. Waiting 151. This takes forever. I don't know, 5 minutes or so. More than that, maybe. I'm going to leave it on this screen, and we'll fast forward through it, but this takes a while. But eventually you're going to get a login screen, and we can proceed. So that took right at 4 minutes for that to restart and come up. The password is admin and password. And it offers you this not so helpful tutorial to get you set up and ready to go. It tells you about CloudStack, how it works, all that good stuff. Continue. You can change the password if you like. I'm going to change it to the same thing. Password. We're going to add a zone. So zone is like your data center. Let's call it zone 1. We are going to, come on, we're going to use our router because this is our data center, right? And it also does our DNS. And then you add a pod. So you think of your pod like a rack. I think it's, yeah, single rack is what it says here. So a pod would be like a rack of servers. You've got your compute, you got your storage, you got your hosts, all that stuff. So hit OK. Pod 1, gateway, save, netmask. By default, most networks are opened up to 255 addresses, which ours is. He makes some recommendations in the tutorial about how many addresses to use. If we do this, 160 to 169 for the pod gateway, we're actually going to run over some addresses that are already existing in my network. But the router should be smart enough to not run them over. So, and again, it's just a test. When we decom this server, everything will go back to normal if we cause havoc. But be aware, if you're of the addresses that you choose, don't run over your network and don't cause issues for somebody else. This is just a test environment, won't hurt me any. Hit continue. The guest network is the big network, right? This is where you're going to, all your VMs are going to live. So it has to be a fairly large range. And we're going to go 170 through 230. Again, it should be smart enough to jump the addresses. If it's just a test, it'll be okay. Okay, cluster. Cluster is, well, a cluster. It's kind of like in OpenStack. You all run under the same KVM. There could be multiple KVMs. It's like everything that's tied to a single compute node. So we'll add the cluster. We're going to use KVM, and we'll just call it cluster 1. This has no value. It's just a name. Hit continue. And then we add a host. So this is the actual. So the cluster is kind of the hardware for the compute node. This is the actual compute node. This is where it's going to simulate multiple servers. This is where it's actually physically going to run KVM. So that's what the host is. And since we're running everything on the same machine, this is all an effort to break it out into multiple machines and make it easier, right? We'll explore some of this if this all pans out. But this is why we opened up root access to this server, so that we could use the root account. It would have all the authority that it needs to use KVM and all that stuff. Primary and secondary storage, we're going to add that. This is what we set up the NFS shares for. So we'll just call this one primary. Everything is on the same server. And the path is very important, and it tripped me up for a while. Because the tutorial kind of confused me, but the path is exports primary. We created that folder, exports, everything underneath it, exports is open to any server to mount it. So the primary, exports, primary. Continue. Secondary. Secondary is where all the templates and stuff like that are going to be stored. Again, it's on the same server. And it's going to be exports secondary. Our templates have already been downloaded to this into a templates folder. So there it is. Continue. Okay. Congratulations, you've made it through the whatever that Explorer or whatever they want to call it. We're going to hit launch, and it's going to go through and it's going to create all this stuff, and it's going to fail. I've never had it complete successfully. So let it bang through all this stuff. It does get you the zone and the physical networks and all that stuff created for you, but it's going to fail on the host. And I'm not sure why it's set up this way, but I'll show you how to get around it here in just a second after it fails. Wow, I am amazed Holy crap, guys! So this is the first time I've ever had this wizard get past adding host. We must have done something right this time. So hopefully this means it's going to be a good tutorial. What it's doing right now is creating these two system VMs that it uses, and we're going to go into that just a little bit more here in just a minute. Let's let this finish. Okay, cloud setup successful. Amazing. Let's launch it. And here we are. So this is the CloudStack interface. This is your dashboard. Now, I've always had it fail at configuring the host, and if you do, go into infrastructure, go into zones, and make sure that this is enabled. It has been disabled every other time I've ever done this. So make sure if it's disabled, come in here, hit enable the zone, wait until it goes green, then go to host, and you should be able to try this again. It will allow you to just add host and then punch in your information one more time, and it'll come up. You cannot add storage until the host is available, so you'll have to go in and hit add storage and punch in your mount information again, like we did in the wizard. But yeah, primary and secondary, you can't do that without hosts. But then everything should continue successfully. He mentions that, by the way. This is stuff that I've gotten from this tutorial, right? He mentions some of that in here that causes a problem. I did all of it. I know all this by reading. Everybody else online is great at participating. So here are the two system VMs that I'm talking about. So the secondary storage VM, I'm not completely sure about. I need to look at some sort of diagram on how this is all configured. I haven't really done a lot of research about it. The console proxy VM is just to allow, that's a VM set up so that you can get into the other hosts. If you view console, this is where I was talking about VNC. It uses VNC so you can log into these if you need to. I don't remember what the default username and password is. The console is slow, I have to admit. So it's root and password for these if you need to get into them. If you need to do troubleshooting, things like that, you can get in here. There are some troubleshooting steps. There are two log files I want to point you to, and again, they're in this tutorial if you need to do troubleshooting. So cat, this guy. This is all kind of normal, but you'll see Java errors or huge errors if you're having problems. What's it doing right now? It should be trying to download some templates automatically so that you can use them for your VMs. And then the agent log as well. This is also a great log to scan if you're having issues. And everything's looking good. Unable to connect to what? Oh, that was just while we were building it. It's all set up, ready to go now. Okay, real quick, one thing I forgot to tell you. If you do a kvm-ok, this is going to give you output of your current KVM configuration and what in relationship to your hardware. This is telling you that you have virtual VT support pretty much. You're able, the hardware that you're on is able to support virtual machines correctly. If this is not, if you do KVM OK and it spits out a bunch of errors, that means you either need to go in and fix something in your BIOS, or your hardware isn't going to support running virtual environments. So that's just telling you after the Q menu install or Q emulator install, check this out, make sure KVM's okay. Again, there's a lot of good information out here. It'll tell you about these subsystem VMs and templates and things like that. This will tell you more about what they are and how to use them. This there's some great troubleshooting in here, like if the templates are stuck and you don't see one, this will help you sort it out. Let's go back to CloudStack real quick. Instances, so what's, why do we do all this stuff, right? Well, we want VMs, so let's add one. So we're just going to add it to zone 1. We're going to use a template. You can use an ISO file. We will explore that. Hit next. It gives you this default template that I've seen so far, CentOS. We'll just select it. We're going to use small. This is a very small machine. We're all in the same one. I'm not going to add any additional since this is a small machine. Don't have any affinity groups yet. We can explore that if we need to. Network, default, security group. We haven't set any extras up. And we'll review, and we're going to hit it. So we don't even have any SSH keys or anything like that set up right now. No security groups. This server, we basically won't be able to do anything with this server. We just want to make sure that the gear is set up, ready to go, and that we can create VMs. This is just the setup tutorial. We'll come back and do a functionality tutorial after this. You do kind of have to keep monitoring, keep refreshing, because it doesn't do a great job at updating you on its status. Alright, it says task completed, and the instance is up and running. So let's take a look. View the console. And the VM looks like it's starting up. It's going through the CentOS boot. So, CloudStack is up, guys. And girls. This is where we're going to leave it for this video. I showed you how to install it. We went through that tutorial together. It's very good. There's a lot of things in there though that we did not do, but since this is a generic 1404 install, we didn't need to do them. If you have different network configurations or you need specific ports open, closed, whatever you need, you might have to do some of that stuff. I don't know what the default login is for these, if there is one at all. Yes, you can use root and password. That's totally safe, right, guys? So there you go. We've got VMs, and we'll get more into making keys and security groups, things like that. But that's it for this video. Hope it helps. We'll keep looking at CloudStack and see what we can do with it. Thanks.